And we begin tonight with breaking news from the Middle East. A longtime ally of President Trump, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, is expected to be indicted on corruption charges. Israeli police say their 14-month-long investigation found sufficient evidence of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust to recommend prosecution. Netanyahu has repeatedly been accused of impeding the investigation and tonight vowed that the police recommendations will, quote, end nothing. Our chief Washington correspondent Eric Ham joins us now. Eric, first let's start with what the White House or State Department is saying about this, if anything.
Right now, there's no statement either from the White House or the State Department. We know about an hour or so ago that Sarah Huckabee Sanders addressed the media. This question did not come up, and she did not take the liberty of actually addressing it as well. So right now, there's been complete radio silence from both Foggy Bottom and 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
Okay, so on to the bigger issue. Does this complicate the Middle East peace process? I take it if he's distracted, it will. If he's removed from office, it certainly will.
Well, let's be clear. This is always going to be a large issue and very challenging. And of course, there are many distractions. This latest incident, this latest bombshell, I think will not necessarily delay or deter the peace agreement because simply there isn't one. What we're seeing is perhaps the president's mainstay, President Trump's biggest ally in the region, now under a cloud of suspicion himself. That will be very difficult for the president going forward because we just don't know what credibility and longevity that Netanyahu will have as the prime minister of Israel.
All right, Eric, stay right there because we are far from done with you. The White House is probably trying to unpack the other big story today, the testimony of FBI Director Christopher Wray, who contradicts the White House version of the security check of former top aide Rob Porter. He was ousted after allegations of domestic violence came out. This as the heads of America's intelligence agencies testified in front of the Senate. Let's go back now to Washington correspondent Eric Ham. Eric, the first question is on the Porter scandal. Takes a monumental turn because the FBI is directly contradicting this timeline that the White House had put up. Talk about that for us.
That's right, and we have seen the White House beginning on last Friday actually come out with statements and with new iterations of what actually took place, who knew what and when. And today at the White House briefing, Sarah Huckabee Sanders seemed to actually implicitly confirm that there are a number of moving parts taking place and that she is only getting information that she has been given, which suggests that perhaps a White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, does not want her to have additional information. So we're still unclear of what's going on, but it is evident that there are contradicting statements which again are pitting the White House and the FBI at odds with one another on this issue.
I mean, if you watched her press conference today, it does appear that Sanders is a little frustrated with how much she is being told of the story, and she's kind of dancing around this timeline, basically contradicting herself as early as this morning.
That's right, she is. But I think the larger issue, the bigger issue is what exactly is going on with the security clearances and the fact that we now know that there are confirmed at least 30 to 40 people in the White House who are operating under provisional clearances. And also, too, what we're seeing is a White House Chief of Staff, John Kelly, that is coming under increasing pressure and fire. And so we do know that there is an enormous amount of tension within the White House. But I think what you're seeing now is the knives are being directly pointed right at John Kelly, and I think that could be problematic for him going forward.
FBI Director Chris Wray, who is a Trump appointee, was once again defending the FBI for not being political in front of an open session of Congress today.
That's right, he was. And also, too, what he did was he laid out the process and made it clear that this process, particularly as it relates to Porter, was actually done and completed in July. And so what we heard this afternoon from Sarah Huckabee Sanders was, for the first time, a mention of the White House clearing process, which is something we had not heard before. So again, we're just getting bits and pieces, a steady drip of new information. But again, we have yet to hear a comprehensive statement from President Trump himself directly on this issue. And again, we're seeing just a White House and the nation's top law enforcement agency increasingly at odds and butting heads over this issue.
Well, you can't put all the intel chiefs in the same room these days without mentioning Russia. That was obviously a key part of this Senate hearing today. They all stated unequivocally and unanimously that Russia continues to meddle in U.S. politics and believe that 2018 will be a specific problem. Eric, what can you tell us about this?
This was a question that was asked pointedly directly at all of the intel chiefs from Senator Mark Warner of Virginia. And he asked them, is Russia continuing to meddle in U.S. elections? And each one of them equivocally stated that yes. And they expect Russia to continue to meddle in our elections. And we do know that the election process right now is underway. We know former President Barack Obama is engaged in the gerrymandering issue. And so it's a very volatile issue when you recognize all of the chief intelligence officers are saying that Russia is actively engaged in the process right now. But unfortunately, there's nothing that we saw or heard from these intel chiefs that suggests that there's anything the U.S. is doing to actually stop it.
Yeah, Senator Jack Reed actually pointedly asked if there's been any directive from the president himself, right?
That's right, he did. He pointedly asked, are they getting directive directly from President Trump to look into this? And each member, from the FBI to CIA's Mike Pompeo to the DNI head Dan Coats, none of them said that they were actually getting any directives from President Trump himself, but that they were all actively engaged in looking and trying to figure out ways to curtail Russia's engagement, Russia's meddling in the elections. But it wasn't coming from the White House.
All right, so they covered the White House, they covered Russia, then they moved over to North Korea. There's been some news on the North Korea front, right?
There is. In fact, it was Senator Dianne Feinstein, senior senator from California, who asked about North Korea. And actually, surprisingly, it was Mike Pompeo who dropped this little nugget that said that there is a plan that the CIA is using to actually get the North Koreans to the table for discussions. He couldn't tell us exactly what those plans are in an open session, but he did say that they have a plan to bring them to the table for talks. And this suggests that maybe there will be a conversation between the United States and North Korea. We saw Mike Pence at the Olympics go back and forth saying that they were open for talks, but now we know there's an actual plan in place to make it happen.
All right, well, Attorney General Jeff Sessions spoke the other day and made comments about Anglo-American remarks in front of basically a sheriff's group. Some civil rights groups now are calling for his immediate termination. Why is everyone so much up in arms?
You're right, Andrew. He spoke before this National Sheriff's Association, and I'll just read to you exactly what he said. Now, let me read to you what the actual prepared remarks were. The prepared remarks that he was supposed to read actually stated, and I quote, "The sheriff is a critical part of our legal heritage." Instead, what he actually said was, "The sheriff is a critical part of the Anglo-American heritage of law enforcement." Now, we know that Jeff Sessions has had his history of issues among race, and I think for many people to hear the top law enforcement official of the United States government make that comment and pointedly state that, I think that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way. And so now you're seeing both on Twitter and even from the nation's oldest and largest civil rights organization, the NAACP, they're all calling for his immediate resignation from this position.
All right, Eric Ham in Washington, D.C. A lot going on today. We'll talk to you later. Thank you. Well, with all this going on, it's not surprising that the White House has become a revolving door. The 34% turnover rate is a modern historic rate, according to the Brookings Institute. That rate is 3 times higher than President Obama's in the same period and double President Reagan's, which until now was the modern record. Attorney Wallace Ford is joining us now. He is chairman of the Department of Public Administration at Medgar Evers College and founder of the commentary blog Point of View. Our good friend Wallace is back with us. So let's start with the turnover in the White House. What is going on? Do these people just want to get out the door, or are they being shoved?
Well, I think in many instances people are probably just trying to head to the nearest exit, I think, as they say. And, you know, you have a number of people of Anglo-American heritage, by the way, in the White House. And a lot of them are concerned about the fact that with all of the investigations and all of the lies that are uncovered going on, that ultimately they're going to be the target, if not of an investigation, at least going to be questioned by authorities like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, for example. And although I'm not an attorney I don't work as an attorney these days. I'm a professor at Medgar Evers College. Obviously, we do a lot of work with respect to the law. And anytime somebody says, well, you know, the FBI wants to talk to you, then you want to get yourself a lawyer, right? Particularly working in this White House. And that's not a small number anymore. You're talking about 6 figures in dollars and cents, and no end in sight as to what's going to happen.
That's right. And I mean, this is a coveted job, being in the White House. It's often very young people in their 20s. I've spoken to some in other agencies who've been offered positions that don't want to necessarily take them. That's a very big overhang in this administration.
Well, you know, the executive office has grown by leaps and bounds over the last half century. It used to be that the number of people who were assistants to the president, this is when Eisenhower was president, was maybe like 14, 15 people. Now we literally have hundreds and sometimes thousands of people in various support positions for the president. So it's a large number of people we're talking about, and you're absolutely correct. A tremendous career opportunity for individuals, people that I went to law school with, for example, some of which wound up working in the White House. It was a tremendous career boost, no doubt. This particular administration, you have to wonder whether that same career boost is available when it turns out that you're involved with all of the kinds of activities going on,
now you've been
or alleged to have gone on.
You've been in several administrations on the city level and under the state level. These sort of problems, and especially the president will tell you he was new to politics, are bound to crop up in the first year.
No doubt, no doubt. You know, it takes a while. You know, I worked for the mayor of the largest city of New York, David Dinkins, for example, and with the governor of then the largest state and second largest state in the Union, Mario Cuomo, and people come and they find out that perhaps they're not the right fit, or perhaps then it's just not the right thing for them to be doing, and they move on. But these kinds of numbers tells you that the initial vetting process is pretty poor, that you have, you know, 34, 39%, you know, 4 out of 10 of the people that they're hired are gone within a year at senior positions. Tells you there wasn't a lot of conversation beforehand about whether I want you on my team, and the chickens are coming home to roost.
Now, many people have looked to General Kelly, the chief of staff. Now, do you think he's going to be shown the door as well? And if so, what then happens?
Well, you know, I mean, there's this notion that because General Kelly was a general, that therefore he knows how to run everything. The difference, of course, is when you're in the military and a general gives an order, you don't have a lot of options. You know, you can either follow the orders that you get in the military, you can wind up in the brig, or I guess even get shot. When you're in the civilian side of things, you get pushback. Everybody doesn't always do what you want them to do, and ultimately you don't have the same level of control that you have in the military. And so, you know, Donald Trump, I think, expected a general is going to come in and just, you know, put everything in order. And
but he bristles against that himself. The word is that he doesn't really want that kind of order.
Well, not for himself. Not for himself. And he is, you hate to see these terms being used, Andrew, and I hesitate to say, but they said people have described him as the president I'm talking about, as trying to deal with like an unruly child, and you have to kind of work with them and see if you can get them to do what you need them to do, and he doesn't. He doesn't do that.
And speaking of that, he's been accused of demanding a loyalty test almost when people come in. That's going to scare away people.
Well, yes, absolutely, because you're not quite sure what loyalty entails. It's like, will you do whatever I want you to do? I said, well, gee, what is it that you may want me to do? You want me to lie for you? You want me to hide evidence for you? You want me to get in front of the press as Sean Spicer had to do and just like make up stuff because you don't have any facts to work with?
Well, I was watching even Sanders, who's widely criticized, but I was watching her press conference today, and she is tired.
Well, you get tired of making stuff up, and I use the term stuff advisedly.
Right.
Yes.
Now, the White House, the West Wing isn't the only place that there are jobs being filled. This administration has lots of jobs unfulfilled, and I'm wondering if it's part of a strategy of downsizing the government. I can't get Congress to do it. I'm just not going to fill positions.
Well, yeah, I think part of it they've said is, representatives of the administration have said part of it is about downsizing government. Rex Tillerson, for example, the State Department has not hired, literally scores of senior officials' jobs have been left vacant. And this is the entity that represents the United States of America literally all over the world, and we don't have that kind of representation. We don't have that kind of bandwidth, if you will, to be able to deal with these situations. The Olympics, Winter Olympics, are taking place in Korea right now. There is no U.S. ambassador to South Korea, for example.
Which is so important because we have these problems with North Korea.
Yeah, one would think, right?
Yeah.
And so it is not a useful thing that we're hearing about. And people talk about downsizing government until they need government, you know, and so, you know, people say...
People are always about that. I don't want government until my garbage needs to be picked up.
Or until there's the next hurricane, you know, or the next snowstorm, or whatever it may be, and or until there's the next healthcare crisis, and so on. Like right now, we have this flu epidemic across the United States, and people want the CDC to do something. Well, guess who's looking to cut the budget of the CDC? The Trump administration.
All right, Wallace Ford, we're having so much fun with you. You're going to stick around for another segment.
Well, that's my pleasure,
We'll
Andrew.
talk to you in a couple of minutes.
Okay, excellent.
Also in the news tonight, South Africa's ruling party is demanding that President Jacob Zuma step down as soon as possible. The ANC decided on a speedy resignation would help stabilize both the country's government and economy. South Africa's highest court ruled that Zuma violated the Constitution when he used state money to make a multi-million-dollar renovation to his private home. Deputy President Cyril Ramaphosa is expected to succeed Zuma as president. Coming up next, could a lawsuit by the state of New York actually hurt the sexual assault victims it's supposed to protect? You're watching Arise America. President Trump has rhetorically asked, where is the due process for men accused of sexual and spousal abuse? Harvey Weinstein can't make that complaint. He will get his day in court. New York State has filed a sexual harassment and abuse suit against Weinstein and his studio company, the Weinstein Company. The suit, though, may end up blocking any sale of the company, and that could mean bankruptcy. Wallace Ford joins us again. He is chairman of the Department of Public Administration at Medgar Evers College. So, Wallace, let's talk about this suit. It's by Eric Schneiderman. He's the New York Attorney General. It's aimed at making sure, according to him, that the victims get some money if there's any sale of the company. Do you think it's a good idea?
Well, you know, it's one of those things, Andrew, it kind of looks good on paper. It certainly looks good in the papers for Attorney General Schneiderman, that he is, you know, doing what he can to advance the interests of the victims, the alleged victims, and the actual victims of Harvey Weinstein. The real world answer to this, though, is that what's going to happen is what's already happened. There was a $500 million deal on the table where an investment group was going to buy the Weinstein Company. There are scores of people who work there at the Weinstein and have for many years who've had nothing
unaffiliated with any of this.
Unaffiliated with any of this, and even if they knew that Harvey Weinstein was kind of like a sleaze or some sort, okay, you're in your job. What is it that you were supposed to do?
I mean, I knew someone who personally worked with him, and it's always Harvey is just Harvey. I'm not sure they knew of any of these allegations. But if the company doesn't get sold, it probably goes out of business in one way or the other, or goes at least files for bankruptcy. And the moment you do that, there's no money.
Well, exactly, and I think that, you know, it's one of those situations where, you know, if you want to sue Harvey Weinstein personally, he's a multi-million-dollar, and indeed that may be an approach, but going after the company this way, okay, it makes the deal very difficult to go through, and you know, the buyer's already walked away in this particular instance. If they come back, it's going to be at a lesser price, and so on. And it really is one of those things where, as I said before, it looks good, but when you start looking at it more closely, you see that the victims aren't going to have more money available to them if they win their lawsuits. And what do you do with all of these, you know, hundreds of people who lose their jobs? You know, in these days and times, I don't care what you see going on Wall Street. You know,
people don't like to lose their jobs.
Nobody likes to lose their
It's that simple,
job.
and especially in the entertainment industry. What is the legal theory behind this lawsuit, though, when you think about it? I mean, what did the company as an entity do wrong?
Well, what they're going to allege, what the Attorney General is alleging, is that indeed these, the company itself was the vehicle by which Harvey Weinstein was able to abuse any number of individuals who are now bringing this lawsuit. What they're also saying, Andrew, and I think this is important, is that there's people in responsibility in the company who knew or should have known, that is, other executives, members of the board of directors, who knew or should have known what was going on, and so therefore they had a responsibility, really, it's a kind of a stretch in some ways, a fiduciary responsibility to all the world. world to make sure that
because he's accused of sexually harassing people and maybe assaulting people who were not exactly necessarily employed by the production company.
Not only weren't necessarily employed, but what we have to understand is that at no point was Harvey Weinstein doing something
on behalf of the company.
Well, within the scope of his duties. Okay, it wasn't like, well, as president and CEO of the Weinstein Company, one of the things we want you to do is assault people. Obviously not. Okay, and so it is a stretch. But what we saw, and it just happened over this weekend, Andrew, is that a $500 million deal was pulled back. They're ready to close and sign the papers, and that would have ensured jobs for the people. They would also would have assured assets.
There's money to pay.
Yeah, certainly that would be a prospect.
And, I mean, he does have. There's a private equity firm behind the company, and I'm wondering if the strategy is for the private equity firm to say we will put $100 million or so number aside if you drop the lawsuit.
Well, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
and so the question becomes, it was a good deal at $500 million. Is it a good deal at $600 million or $700 million, or we'll say $300 million and we'll put the $200 into some kind of escrow account? It gets complicated at that point, and I don't know that a buyer really wants those complications.
And now you look at Weinstein, and this is going on at other companies. There are other state attorney generals who may take similar action against companies.
Sure.
If you think
so.
so.
Sure. I mean, there may be a day where the Trump organization is in that same position. We don't know. But we know there's multiple allegations against the owner of the Trump organization. And so, I can see why the president is talking about there needs to be due process. Although I've got to point out that when the Central Park Five were arrested, those 5 young men of color were arrested back in 1989 for these horrific crimes against the Central Park jogger.
Here in New York City. And ultimately were found to be innocent. At the time that they were arrested, before they were convicted, Donald Trump was saying these individuals should get the death penalty. Now, that's what people used to say when they did lynching in this country, unfortunately not too long ago. And so he wasn't talking about due process then. But for due process for privileged men who are accused of assaulting women, yeah, he has a different story there. I think it's shameful. It's absolutely shameful. Okay. Well, it's Ford. Thank you.
My pleasure.
As always.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
In business news today, a rocky Tuesday for the markets as the bond sell-off continues to drag equities down in the early trading. That's the fear that interest rates are going to go up. At the end of the day, however, the Dow did finish in the green, 39 points. Pepsi reported mixed news as the New York-based beverage company says sales are flat. Pepsi expects to hand out bonuses and cut a little more than 1,000 jobs in its corporate offices. Citing the tax cuts, Pepsi will deliver $1,000 bonuses to those who make its sodas and snacks and its delivery workers. Pepsi will also boost its annual dividend. Small business owners say they're more confident about the future and plan to expand their businesses. A survey by the National Federation of Independent Businesses found that 32% of small businesses say now is a good time to expand. That's the highest number since 1986. 41% expect the economy to improve, and that's up 4% since December. Barnes & Noble is not one business that's expanding. The book retailer plans to cut jobs and restructuring of its brick-and-mortar stores. The New York-based retailer is hoping to save $40 million annually. Barnes & Noble wouldn't say how many jobs will be lost, but it reported a 6% sales decline this holiday season. The pharmacy chain Walgreens is in talks to buy AmerisourceBergen. Amerisource is a drug distributor. Walgreens already owns 21% of Amerisource, but reports today says that it is looking to buy all of it. U.S. oil production is growing so fast, it's now expected to catch up to Russia this year. That's led by shale. U.S. crude output will first overtake Saudi Arabia, according to the International Energy Agency. Shale, which is oil derived from fracking, is lighting a fire under production despite environmental concerns. And Americans may be buying up cryptocurrencies, but shh, they're not telling the IRS. According to the company Credit Karma, only 100 people who have filed their 2017 taxes have reported buying the likes of Bitcoin, even though 250,000 Americans have actually done so. The IRS considers Bitcoin property, not currency, and that it must be reported as a gain or loss on taxes. That's business news for this Tuesday. Coming up next, how a good deed in Haiti turned into a nightmare for one charity. You're watching Arise America. Welcome back to Arise America. The chairman of the British-based charity Oxfam is under arrest in Guatemala. Juan Alberto Fuentes is being held as part of an investigation into a corruption scandal when he was Guatemala's finance minister. While his detention is not related to his role at Oxfam, it will put further pressure on the charity, which is reeling from revelations that its staff hired prostitutes while delivering aid to Haiti. The deputy executive of Oxfam has already resigned over that scandal. Joining us now to discuss the ramifications and the next steps are Jocelyn Mccalla, Advocacy Coordinator for Haitian Americans United for Progress, and Taina Bien-Aime, Executive Director of the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women. Jocelyn, I'll begin with you. If you can give us a broad overview of what this scandal is about.
Well, I think, as you stated, the scandal is pretty clear. A high official of Oxfam engaged in illegal activities, abusing women and girls for the benefit of sexual exploitation. This person, and I would suppose that there has to be much more investigation leading to whether or not this was a widespread instance by Oxfam or other non-profit organizations in Haiti. But the fact is that this is a situation that sends off a lot of alarm, both in Haiti and elsewhere, where Oxfam has been operating. As you know, Oxfam operates throughout the world. It's a very, very large organization that gets funding from a lot of governments and international institutions as well as the public.
And they've been accused of similar things, not as this is much extreme, but as problems elsewhere. In Haiti, the president has said that he wants the group out. Is that the right call?
Well, I think it's what's really incredible is that attention is being drawn to this situation, because for decades we've known that not only Oxfam but other international aid agencies and their staff, UN peacekeepers and other UN personnel have allegedly been involved in the exploitation of women and girls and boys as well. So, we are thrilled that the story has come out and that there will be hopefully some form of investigation that will lead to an end to the impunity. But this is not a unique situation.
And in fact, Oxfam says that they take the allegations of sexual abuse and misconduct very seriously and that they're going to investigate it, but it does go to a question of accountability and of the process in place. At Oxfam, I understand that people are often hired without background checks and volunteers.
Well, I'm not familiar with the rules and regulations that Oxfam operates by, and so I could not speak to that. But I think that what I could say is that in the wake of the earthquake, the devastating earthquake in Haiti in 2010, there was a huge outpouring of grief and support for Haitians. So Oxfam, as well as a number of other international institutions, got a windfall with respect to funding. And
yeah, we have to remember these are nonprofit groups doing, on balance, probably very good things, but they are funded by donations.
That is correct. So they fielded quite a number of people, and I imagine that a lot of these people did not have the requisite expertise or training necessary in order to deal with this. And I am personally offended that, for example, that you have a huge number of Haitians that are highly qualified who are in fact not involved in the effort to rebuild the country, and that you had the situation in which perhaps well-meaning but ill-trained people were deployed in Haiti.
The idea of we know best, is you think that permeates charitable organizations often?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, so what do you think has to happen here? The immediate steps have to take place for Oxfam and others maybe to do internal investigations.
Well, this is an issue, and the issue is of exchanging money for sex, or exchanging goods or services for sex. For over 2 decades, the United Nations has been struggling with this. 3 Secretary Generals in a row have established mechanisms and measures to stop this form of exploitation.
And that's probably because it attracts people who want to take advantage of areas easily exploited. to some extent?
Well, it has to do with the culture of purchasing sex, and I think that's one of the issues that we have with the reporting of all this. Is the question is not what are they actually doing to these women and girls, but whether or not they were paid or whether or not they're underage. Those are the wrong questions. The question is, what should we do to end the demand for
sex trafficking,
for this form of exploitation, for prostitution, the demand for prostitution.
Theresa May, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, is threatening to end funding to the aid organization. Is that the right move? Because that would be the equivalent possibly of crippling it.
Well, I think threatening to cut off the fund is a step forward. That means that the organization and its leaders have to take seriously the idea that they need to clean up their act, so to speak. To my knowledge, and reading the news reports, the person who was hired by Oxfam and directed this operation in Haiti and engaged in prostitution and so on was doing that before he was hired for Oxfam, and has since been identified with similar activities elsewhere. But all of these organizations are funded in whole or in part by a number of governments and institutions, and therefore what needs to be done is for the international aid agencies to clean up their act, frankly, and to really say that we need to work with the people on the ground.
Do you think there's a little bit of overlooking intentionally by governments, because saying we need these organizations, they're doing work that otherwise governments would have to do, and maybe we won't pay as close attention to these things as they percolate in the corporate world, for example?
Well, I mean, we're talking about gender-based violence and discrimination, which is always at the margins of conversations and investment. But I do think we need to move from theoretical solutions to practical solutions, ensure that people are trained.
Background checks, do you believe?
Yes, and also increasing the number of women in management positions and leadership positions, and listening to the survivors and seeing exactly what has been done to them.
And do you believe this is connected in a way to the Me Too movement, that there's a raising of this consciousness worldwide?
Well, you wonder why it has come out now, when we've known for decades that this is happening, not just in Haiti, but across Africa, Chad, the Congo, et cetera. So it's a welcome piece of news, and we really do hope that governments will pay attention.
And ultimately, it's not just governments, but it's the people who donate money, and particularly large foundations that funnel money there, that may ultimately have the biggest influence, do you think?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that there needs to be really a sort of a reworking of international foreign assistance, both by government as well as by nonprofit organizations. I think that as Taina has really mentioned, that women should be much more prominently involved in the decision-making process, in order to make sure that such behavior does not repeat itself. But at the same time, we do have to question the unequal relationship that you find yourself under. I mean, Haiti, as you know, is very impoverished. It has, for quite a long time, depended on international foreign assistance for a number of things. And
it's had a series of natural disasters.
It has had a series of natural disasters. So these elements, are really make it a complex issue that you just can't solve with just one or two steps. But we need to have a real good conversation about this.
Okay. Jocelyn, Taina, thank you both for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Coming up next, the battle to help dreamers. They came from around the world, not just Latin America. You're watching Arise America. While the majority of DACA recipients are from Mexico, Central and South America, more than 12,000 are from Africa and the Caribbean. But since many of them are first-generation college students, sustained college enrollment is often challenging. Cheryl Sterling is here. She is the Director of Black Studies Department at City College here in New York. Welcome to Arise America, Cheryl.
Well, thank you.
The conversation around DACA tends to overlook people from Africa. Why is that?
I think the conversations in general tend to overlook people from Africa. People tend to conceive of Africa as this one thing, not understanding that is, the second largest continent. There is an amalgam of folks, and that they're making major contributions to our society every day.
So, where are the largest African immigrants from enrolled in City College?
Well, many students are coming from Nigeria. They're coming from Ghana. There's also quite a few Egyptians. People forget that Egypt is in Africa. Yeah. And, in general, however, the issues that are affecting DACA immigrants are also affecting people from Ethiopia.
Interesting. So what are those issues, and how is it more challenging in the educational environment? Why do we have to segment them out?
Well, one of the things is that these students are really, of course, like all DACA recipients, they've come here through no fault of their own. And they've come with, they've came as young children. The idea is, of course, to participate in the American dream, to participate in education on every level. And one of the things that City College does, it's a college for immigrants. It's a college for first-generation students. So it doesn't penalize any student who doesn't have their papers. And it won't penalize you in terms of enrollment, and also it won't penalize you in terms of funding.
So part of your role is to help students kind of find their way and their place. How does that process differ, let's say, from other students at City College?
Well, with our DACA students, I can't say who is a DACA and who's not, because I don't know that information. Unless a student tells me that specifically, I can't, there's no differentiation. And so I think that's a great thing within the college. You don't know until someone actually reveals it to you. So say, for instance, I've had a couple, graduate students, or students going towards graduate school who are DACA recipients. I can give just, without giving too many specifics, one recently was applying to all these different graduate programs. And I asked her, what exactly is your status with the DACA system? And she's like, well, I extended before all of this came down. And I said to her, good, make sure you put that in all of your applications, because now you're moving out of protected environment and you don't know what the other programs are going to do or how they may penalize you by not accepting you because of that status. Especially going into a PhD program, these programs want to give a 5-year commitment, and the students have a 5-year commitment.
What kind of areas are they interested in studying? Is there a difference?
All sorts of areas. We have, City College is the premier engineering school, is the premier science school. So you find a lot of African immigrants in the science programs and the medical programs. I'm in the humanities, and so I get the lesser number. But what they do, we always have a bunch of public programs. We had one series of programs called the Chuana Achebe Legacy Series, which gave homage to all the African writers. And the students came out in numbers because they didn't see themselves reflected anywhere. So one of the things that we've been able to do is create a space where the students can come and kind of participate in some event or some cultural event or something in the university.
And one of those events is happening tonight at City College.
Yes,
You're having a panel. Talk to us about that.
This panel is composed of with lawyers and activists. And so we've pulled together people from, African Voices Heard, African Communities Together, Black Alliance for Just Immigration, and they are all experts in the field of how to negotiate the system of immigration. And so what we thought was that we've done programs before, but we didn't have activists who could specifically speak to the legal aspects of immigration. And so this program, that's how it differs. But since they're lawyers and activists, they can speak to the legal aspect and answer some of the questions that students have. And also then they can follow up with these specific folks and their organization for greater legal counsel.
And if New Yorkers want to attend?
Yes,
yes. At what time and where?
It's going to be it's very soon. It's starting at 6, most likely 6:30 now. We're always on a little African time, all right? And it'll go till about 8:30. And we provide food, okay?
And it's up at City College on 136th Street?
It's on 137th Street at Convent Avenue, okay?
Sure, thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you too.
Have a good conference
appreciate
tonight.
All right.
Coming up, hashtag Bring Back the Girls, but 4 years later, 112 of the missing girls of Nigeria are still not around. Hope is not vanished, though. We'll update you on the situation. You're watching Arise America. Welcome back to Arise America. The Me Too movement has given birth to a new book award. The Staunch Book Prize was created by British author Bridget Lawless. The contest challenges authors to write thrillers which do not contain sexual or physical violence against women. Lawless believes depictions of women as helpless victims is bound to have a subconscious effect on how women see themselves. The Staunch Prize will begin accepting submissions next week until July. Winners will get about $3,000. Remember the abduction of 276 schoolgirls in Nigeria? Today, the first of their captives to face trial was sentenced to 15 years in prison. Nearly 4 years later, 112 of them remain in captivity. But our next guest, Aisha Muhammad Oyebode, says the sentence does not go far enough. She's an attorney and an activist and a daughter of one of Nigeria's former military leaders, and we'll talk to you about that in a few minutes. It's been 4 years since these girls were captive in Nigeria. First, let's start with the sentence of 15 years. That seems pretty low, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely. It's way too low, especially if you look at how do you compensate for these young girls who have had their freedom taken away. Some of them have been with, there's still 112 girls with Boko Haram. We're looking at 4 years on the 14th of April this year. There are girls who were released after 2-3 years. How do you compensate for that? And more importantly, some of the girls who came back have told us that some of the girls have died in captivity. So 15 years does not compensate for a life.
Former President Jonathan was widely criticized for his role. If you had 112 people kidnapped in, say, the United States, the government would send the military all over the place to find them. What has the reaction from this administration, the current one, been better than the past one?
Yes, to the extent that at least during this administration, a substantial number of girls have been released. The first girl who was found was actually in this administration. And in fact, it was 276 girls that were kidnapped between the day when they were kidnapped and when they got to the outskirts of Sambisa Forest. It was actually 4 days. It took them 24 hours from Chibok to Sambisa. The girls were jumping off trees, they were hanging onto branches, they were jumping onto the ground.
What kind of conditions have they been faced in captivity?
Oh, the girls have been raped. They've been used as sexual slaves. Some of them have come back with children. It's really been a devastating situation for them.
Now, you do a lot of work on gender equality and violence. How did you pivot this work from being an attorney?
Well, I started doing a lot of humanitarian response work and a lot of work in advocacy for women, and then I realized that the extent of the violence against women is, really immeasurable. If you look at Boko Haram in the last 7 years has used more women and girls as suicide bombers than any other group in the entire world.
They send girls as suicide bombers.
Yes. So if you look at, for example, if you compare it to the Tamil Tigers, in 10 years the Tamil Tigers has used about 46 women. Boko Haram has used over 276. That's the official count. We're looking more like at over 400 plus women and girls as suicide bombers. So the kind of violence we're seeing and we've been seeing with this group is really extreme.
What is, do you think, sparking the extremism, specifically in Nigeria?
Well, with regards to the violence against women, clearly it is a reflection of the violence that already exists within the society against women, especially around areas of forced marriage, and there's a lot of structural violence. Women are not given the same opportunities to go to school as men. They don't have the same rights as men. So there are lots of laws
and policies. They're not occupying leadership positions.
They're not occupying leadership positions.
Do we see them at the top levels of government?
Not to the extent that we should. If you look at, it's we're 50% of the population, and our representation is less than, I would probably say, about 10% in government. So that's not adequate at all. And so those are some of the things that are fueling the violence. And generally, I think a lack of good education opportunities, especially in northern Nigeria, even for young men. That's why Boko Haram has a huge army to recruit from.
You're the CEO of the Murtala Muhammad Foundation, named after your father. Talk about a little bit about what that foundation does.
Okay, so we do a lot of work around gender, which we've talked about, education. We have just expanded our scholarship fund for women and girls, especially in Northeast. We're looking at digital leadership because we feel that that's the way in which we can leapfrog the disadvantage for both not just women but also men, boys as well as girls in northern Nigeria. And then we do a huge amount of work around women mentorship programs as well as humanitarian response.
This would be the 42nd anniversary of your father's assassination. He was among the series of military leaders of Nigeria. What do you remember of him and his role in the country?
I think to a large extent my father was a revolutionary, and I think that that's really important, especially when you look at what's going on the continent at this time. He understood the place that Africa had in the world and the place that Nigeria has within the African continent, and his regime was instrumental in some of the fight against injustices in southern Africa, apartheid, dismantling apartheid in the whole of the southern African region. And, that understanding that Africans, have come of age. Even at that time, this is 42 years ago, he felt Africa had come of age, and there was so much more that we could do for ourselves.
If he looks at Nigeria now, what would he think, do you think?
I think he would be sad to a certain extent in terms of the fact that we have not sustained our leadership role on the continent, as well as Africa has not sustained its leadership role in the world. But at the same time, when you look at what's happening in the private sector, what's happening with businesses, what's happening with so on.
Nigeria is leading the economy throughout Africa.
Exactly.
And I want to talk about that a little bit. As economics improve, does the situation improve for women, or does it get worse, do you think?
Well, I think it's, it depends on where you look at. Women make up the largest sector of the informal economy. That's the underground economy that's not well recorded or well reported, but that is the backbone of our economy. So women in that respect are doing well. But what we are saying is that why are they not recorded? Why are they not being given value for all of the work that they're doing? And that's what we need to see, that women now are pulled out of the informal economy into the formal side of the economy.
And education will help get them there.
Definitely. There's no doubt about that.
No.
If you ask me what is one magic bullet for Africa or Nigeria, I would say education.
Okay. Aisha, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure talking with you. That's it for Arise America today. I'm Andrew Schmertz. Thanks for joining us. We will see you again back here on Wednesday. Have a very good evening, everyone.